History books are full of heroes, geniuses, and visionaries. But some of the most successful people who ever lived were straight-up frauds. Fake doctors who performed real surgeries. Fake princes who ruled real countries. A woman who convinced royal physicians she was giving birth to rabbits. These are 33 historical figures who built their entire lives on lies so outrageous, so ridiculously bold, that you will genuinely struggle to believe any of this is real. 1. In the 1820s, a Scottish soldier named Gregor MacGregor walked into London's high society and announced that he was the prince of a thriving Central American nation called Poyais. He had maps, he had a flag, he even printed his own currency. Banks in London sold bonds for this country. Settlers bought land, and then roughly 250 hopeful colonists actually boarded ships and sailed across the Atlantic to start new lives in Poyais. When they arrived, there was no capital city, no government buildings, no harbor, just mosquito-infested jungle and swampland. Over 150 people died from disease and starvation before rescue ships could reach them. And MacGregor? He was briefly arrested in France, acquitted, and then went right back to London to sell more Poyais land. The man literally ran the same scam twice, and people still bought it. 2. In 1726, a woman named Mary Toft from the English countryside pulled off one of the strangest medical hoaxes in history. She convinced local doctors that she was giving birth to rabbits. Not one rabbit, multiple rabbits. Over the course of several weeks. Word traveled fast, and soon even King George I sent his personal surgeon to investigate. The royal physician examined her, watched her apparently deliver rabbit parts, and published an official report confirming it was real. Newspapers went wild. London was obsessed. But then a porter at the hospital was caught sneaking a rabbit into her room, and the whole thing collapsed. Mary eventually confessed that she had been inserting dead rabbit parts into herself the entire time. The royal surgeon's career was destroyed, and Mary Toft became one of the most embarrassing chapters in British medical history. 3. In 1906, a man named Wilhelm Voigt pulled off one of the most absurdly German crimes ever committed. He was an unemployed cobbler with a long criminal record and zero military experience, but he walked into a second-hand shop, bought a used Prussian captain's uniform, stepped outside, and simply started giving orders to real soldiers on the street. And they obeyed. Every single one. Voigt marched his little borrowed platoon straight to the town hall of Copenic, a suburb of Berlin, told the mayor he was under arrest by order of the Kaiser, and then calmly emptied the city treasury of over 4,000 marks. By the time anyone figured out what happened, Voigt had changed clothes and vanished. He was caught 10 days later, but the story was so funny that even Kaiser Wilhelm II laughed about it. Voigt served less than 2 years in prison and became a national folk hero. 4. Victor Lustig might be the smoothest con artist who ever lived. In 1925, this Czech-born swindler read a newspaper article about the Eiffel Tower being expensive to maintain, and that one sentence sparked an idea so audacious it almost sounds fictional. He forged government documents, posed as a French official, and invited 6 scrap metal dealers to a private meeting. He told them the government was secretly selling the Eiffel Tower for scrap, and one of them, a man named André Poisson, paid a massive bribe plus the purchase price to secure the deal. By the time Poisson realized he had been conned, Lustig was already in another country. And here is the truly unbelievable part. Lustig came back to Paris and ran the exact same scam again on a completely different buyer. He also once scammed Al Capone out of $50,000, which takes a very specific kind of courage. 5. Ferdinand Waldo. Demerara earned the nickname the Great Impostor, and honestly, he earned every letter of it. This man from Massachusetts had no college degree, no medical training, no professional qualifications of any kind. But over the course of his life, he successfully posed as a surgeon aboard a Royal Canadian Navy destroyer during the Korean War, where he performed actual surgeries on wounded soldiers, including removing a bullet lodged near a man's heart. He also impersonated a civil engineer, a sheriff's deputy, a prison warden, a college professor, and a Trappist monk. His trick was simple. He would steal the identity of a real professional, memorize a textbook overnight, and then just act confident. It worked almost every single time. He only got caught because a mother of one of his patients saw his photo in a newspaper and recognized him from a completely different fake identity. 6. In 1817, a young woman appeared in the English village of Almondsbury, speaking a language nobody could identify. She wore exotic clothing, refused to eat normal food, and seemed completely baffled by British customs. Local authorities brought in linguists, scholars, and sailors from around the world. Eventually, a Portuguese sailor claimed he could translate her words and confirmed she was Princess Caraboo, a royal figure from an island called Javasu in the Indian Ocean. She became an overnight sensation. Wealthy families invited her to dinners. Newspapers ran breathless stories about her. Then, a boarding house owner from Bristol saw her picture in the paper and said, "That is Mary Baker, a cobbler's daughter from Devon who stayed at my place last month." The entire princess persona, the fake language, the exotic manners, all invented by a bored working-class woman who just wanted a more interesting life. 7. Juan Pujol. Garcia might be the greatest liar who ever served the cause of good. During World War II, this Spanish chicken farmer approached British intelligence and offered to spy against the Nazis. They turned him down. So he went to the Germans instead, convinced them he was a loyal Nazi agent, and started sending them intelligence reports from Britain, a country he had never visited. He made it all up using tourist guides and newsreels. Eventually, the British found out and recruited him for real, giving him the code name Garbo. Together with his handlers, he built a network of 27 completely fictitious subagents. On the eve of D-Day, Garbo sent a message to Berlin claiming the Normandy invasion was just a diversion and the real attack would hit the Pas-de-Calais. Hitler believed him and held back his reserve divisions. Garbo received medals from both Germany and Britain for opposite reasons. 8. In late 19th century France, a woman named Thérèse Humbert told everyone she had inherited a fortune of 100 million francs from a mysterious American millionaire named Robert Henry Crawford. There was just one catch. The money and securities were locked inside a safe in her home, and the terms of the will said it could not be opened until a specific legal dispute was resolved. Using this story alone, she borrowed millions from French banks and lived like royalty for 20 years. She threw lavish parties. She wore the finest clothes. She rubbed shoulders with politicians and aristocrats. And for 2 entire decades, not a single person thought to question the story. When investigators finally forced the safe open in 1902, they found inside it an old newspaper, a copper coin, and one single trouser button. Thérèse and her family fled to Spain but were caught and sentenced to prison. 9. In the early 1700s, a man calling himself George Psalmanazar showed up in London claiming to be a native of Formosa, which is modern-day Taiwan. He captivated English society with tales of his homeland, where he said people ate raw meat including human flesh, worshipped the sun and the moon, and sacrificed 18,000 young boys' hearts to their gods every year. He invented an entire alphabet and grammar for a language he called Formosan. He even published a best-selling book titled An Historical and Geographical Description of Formosa. Oxford University invited him to teach. The Church of England funded his work, and none of it was real. Psalmanazar was almost certainly a Frenchman who had never been anywhere near Asia. When a real Jesuit missionary who had actually lived in Asia challenged him publicly, the whole story fell apart. Psalmanazar eventually confessed, but only decades later, and spent his old age writing a deeply remorseful memoir. 10. Frank Abagnale became famous as the teenage con artist whose story inspired the movie Catch Me If You Can. According to his own account, he successfully impersonated a Pan Am pilot, a hospital doctor, and a Louisiana prosecutor, all before he turned 21, while cashing millions in forged checks across 26 countries. It is one of the most thrilling con artist stories ever told. There is just one problem. Recent investigations suggest that most of it was wildly exaggerated or completely made up. Journalists and researchers have found little evidence that he ever flew a single plane, practiced medicine, or passed a bar exam. His actual criminal career appears to have been far smaller and less glamorous. So the man who became the world's most famous liar might have been lying about how good he was at lying. If that is not poetic, nothing is. 11. In 1993, a 32-year-old Scottish man named Brian McKinnon enrolled at his former high school, Bearsden Academy, near Glasgow. He called himself Brandon Lee, claimed to be a 16-year-old Canadian student, dyed his hair blonde, and simply walked back into school. Nobody recognized him. Not a single teacher, not one classmate. And here is what makes this story truly surreal. Brandon Lee became the top student in his year. He aced his exams. He won a place at Dundee University's medical school, which had been his lifelong dream and the very reason he went back to school. He attended university for an entire year before a newspaper exposed him. When asked why he did it, McKinnon said he had been unfairly rejected from medical school years earlier and just wanted another chance. The documentary about this case is called My Old School, and it is every bit as bizarre as it sounds. 12. Around the year 1600, a man appeared in Poland claiming to be Dmitry Ivanovich, the youngest son of Ivan the Terrible, the infamous Tsar of Russia. The real Dmitry had died in 1591, almost certainly murdered as a child, but this newcomer insisted he had miraculously escaped the assassination. He was charismatic, convincing, and backed by Polish nobles who saw a chance to put a puppet on the Russian throne. Incredibly, he invaded Russia with a small army, won enough support, and actually became Tsar in 1605. But his reign lasted barely a year. He offended Russian nobles by favoring Polish customs, married a Polish Catholic wife, and ate veal, which Russians at the time considered sinful. A group of boyars stormed the Kremlin, killed him, burned his body, packed the ashes into a cannon, and fired them in the direction of Poland. That is not a metaphor. They literally shot him out of a cannon. 13. For nearly 50 years, Dr. James Barry served as one of the most respected military surgeons in the British Empire. Barry performed one of the first successful cesarean sections in Africa in 1826, where both the mother and child survived, something almost unheard of at the time. Barry fought to improve sanitary conditions in hospitals, clashed with Florence Nightingale, and rose to the rank of Inspector General. Barry was also short, had a high voice, and refused to let anyone examine the body when ill. When Barry died in 1865, the person who prepared the body for burial discovered that Dr. James Barry had been born female. Barry had been living as a man since enrolling at the University of Edinburgh Medical School at the age of around 15, and had maintained this identity for an entire career, spanning multiple continents and decades of military service. Nobody in the army had known. 14. Han van Meegeren was a Dutch painter who felt ignored and disrespected by the art world. So he decided to get revenge in the most creative way possible. He spent years perfecting the techniques of 17th century master Johannes Vermeer, and then started painting brand new Vermeers that fooled every expert alive. His masterpiece forgery, The Supper at Emmaus, was hailed as one of Vermeer's greatest lost works. He sold several paintings to Nazi leaders, including Hermann Göring himself. After World War II, van Meegeren was arrested for collaborating with the enemy by selling Dutch cultural treasures to the Nazis. Facing a potential death sentence for treason, he made a jaw-dropping confession. The paintings were fakes, and he had painted them all himself. Nobody believed him. So to prove it, he painted yet another Vermeer right there in front of police and court officials. The charge was reduced to forgery, and in the Netherlands, he briefly became a folk hero for having conned the Nazis. 15. There is something beautifully simple about the scam pulled by a British man who, in the early 20th century, decided he was tired of paying for dinner. He adopted the persona of Prince Constantine of Albania, dressed the part with enough flair to be convincing, and strolled into some of London's finest restaurants demanding the treatment befitting royalty. And he got it. Waiters bowed. Managers offered their best tables. The food and champagne flowed freely, and the bill somehow never quite arrived. This was not a sophisticated con involving forged documents or elaborate backstories. It was just a man betting, correctly, that nobody in a London restaurant would dare question someone who carried himself like foreign royalty. His real name was about as exotic as a cup of tea, and his scheme only ended when someone bothered to check whether Albania actually had a prince by that name. Spoiler, it did not. 16. The Chevalier d'Eon was a real-life spy for King Louis XV of France, who lived one of the most extraordinary double lives in European history. For the first half of their life, d'Eon served openly as a male diplomat and soldier, was decorated for bravery in the 7 Years' War, and ran espionage operations across Europe. Then, in the 1770s, d'Eon began living publicly as a woman. King Louis XVI even issued a royal decree requiring d'Eon to dress in women's clothing. London's gambling houses ran enormous bets on d'Eon's true sex, with wagers reaching the equivalent of millions of dollars today. d'Eon lived the final 33 years of life as a woman, and it was only after death in 1810 that an autopsy finally revealed a body that was anatomically male. The doctors who examined the body were reportedly stunned. d'Eon's life was so remarkable that the word Eonism was later coined by psychologists as an early term for cross-gender identification. 17. Cassie Chadwick was born Elizabeth Bigley in rural Ontario, Canada, and she started running scams as a teenager. But her magnum opus came in the early 1900s when she arranged for a Cleveland lawyer to accidentally see her leaving the New York mansion of Andrew Carnegie, the richest man in America. She then casually let the lawyer discover a forged promissory note for millions, signed by Carnegie himself. Within days, rumors spread through Cleveland's banking community that Cassie Chadwick was Andrew Carnegie's secret illegitimate daughter and sole heiress. She never confirmed or denied it, which only made people more certain it was true. Banks fell over themselves to lend her money, a total of somewhere between $10 and $20 million in today's currency. Nobody ever thought to ask Carnegie directly because apparently that would have been rude. When the scheme finally unraveled in 1904, several banks collapsed, and Cassie was sentenced to 10 years in prison, where she died in 1907. 18. In 1956, a book called The Third Eye became an international bestseller. Its author, Tuesday Lobsang Rampa, claimed to be a Tibetan lama who had undergone a mystical operation to open his third eye, allowing him to see auras and perceive past lives. The book was packed with vivid descriptions of life in a Tibetan monastery, ancient Buddhist rituals, and encounters with spiritual masters. Readers across Europe and America were fascinated. Then, a private detective hired by a skeptical publisher tracked Lobsang Rampa to a house in suburban England and discovered he was actually Cyril Henry Hoskin, the son of a plumber from Devon who had never been to Tibet and did not speak a word of Tibetan. When confronted, Hoskin did not apologize. Instead, he claimed that the spirit of a Tibetan monk had entered his body during a fall from a tree. He continued writing books under the Rampa name for decades, and they kept selling. 19. Lola Montez burst onto the European stage in the 1840s as a fiery Spanish dancer with raven hair and a scandalous reputation. She performed across the continent, seduced powerful men, and eventually caught the eye of King Ludwig I of Bavaria. The king was completely smitten. He gave her a palace, a title, Countess of Landsfeld, and an enormous allowance. She began meddling in Bavarian politics, influencing government appointments and alienating both the church and the aristocracy. Her influence over the king became so extreme that it helped trigger the Revolution of 1848, which forced Ludwig to abdicate his throne. And the twist? Lola Montez was not Spanish at all. Her real name was Eliza Gilbert, and she was born in Ireland. She had invented the entire Spanish persona, the accent, the backstory, all of it, because she figured a Spanish dancer would be more exciting than an Irish girl from County Sligo. She was absolutely right. 20. Enric Marco stood before audiences across Spain and Europe for nearly 30 years, sharing his harrowing personal account of surviving a Nazi concentration camp. He rose to become president of the Amical de Mauthausen, Spain's most prominent association of concentration camp survivors. He gave speeches at memorials. He addressed the Spanish Parliament. He was the face of historical memory for thousands of Spaniards who had suffered under fascism. Then in 2005, historian Benito Bermejo revealed the truth. Marco had never been imprisoned in any concentration camp. He had gone to Germany during the war, yes, but as a voluntary worker, not a prisoner. His stories of suffering, the guards, the starvation, the daily terror, were all fabricated. The exposure was devastating, not just because Marco had lied, but because he had exploited the real suffering of thousands of actual survivors to build his own public legacy. It remains one of the most disgraceful cases of stolen valor in modern European history. 21. The Count of Saint-Germain drifted through 18th century European courts like a character from a fantasy novel. He appeared in Paris around 1748, spoke at least 6 languages fluently, played the violin brilliantly, and claimed with a completely straight face that he was several thousand years old. He told people he had personally known Jesus Christ, attended the wedding feast at Cana, and had long conversations with the Queen of Sheba. He said he possessed an elixir that kept him eternally young. And the strangest part? People believed him, or at least they could not disprove him. Voltaire called him the man who never dies and who knows everything. He was welcomed at the court of Louis XV, conducted secret diplomatic missions, and vanished periodically only to reappear decades later looking exactly the same. Official records say he died in 1784, but claimed sightings of Saint-Germain continued well into the 19th century. To this day, nobody knows who he actually was. 22. In the late 1940s, a mysterious and handsome musician wearing an ornate turban appeared on Los Angeles television. His name was Korla Pandit, and he was billed as a musical genius from New Delhi, India. He never spoke on camera, just gazed intensely into the lens while playing the organ and piano simultaneously. He became one of the first stars of American television, predating even Liberace. His exotic persona, complete with stories about growing up in an Indian musical dynasty, captivated audiences for decades. It was not until after his death in 1998 that journalist R.J. Smith uncovered the truth. Korla Pandit was born John Roland Redd, an African-American man from St. Louis, Missouri. In the deeply segregated America of the 1940s, Redd understood that a black musician would face almost insurmountable barriers in the entertainment industry. So he reinvented himself entirely, bet everything on a fabricated identity, and it worked for over 50 years. 23. Around the year 1600, a teenage girl named Catalina de Erauso escaped from a convent in the Basque country of Spain, cut her hair, bound her chest, and disguised herself as a young man. What she did next was not just hide. She enlisted in the Spanish army and shipped off to South America, where she spent the next 15 years as a soldier and conquistador. She fought in battles against the Mapuche in Chile, got into knife fights, killed men in duels, and earned a reputation as a fearless and brutal fighter. Nobody suspected a thing. Her secret was eventually revealed after she confessed to a bishop following a near-death experience. When the story reached Spain, instead of being punished, she became a celebrity. The Pope himself granted her special permission to continue wearing men's clothes. She spent the rest of her life as a mule driver in Mexico, and her autobiography, The Lieutenant Nun, reads like an action movie that someone accidentally set in the 17th century. 24. Christian Gerhardsreiter arrived in the United States from Germany in 1978 as a teenager, and over the next 3 decades, he became one of the most audacious identity thieves in American history. He cycled through fake personas like outfits, posing as a British aristocrat, a Wall Street trader, and a physics researcher. But his masterpiece was Clark Rockefeller, a supposed member of the legendary Rockefeller family. As Clark, he married a Harvard-educated businesswoman named Sandra Boss, who earned millions at the consulting firm McKinsey. They had a daughter together. For years, nobody questioned him, even though no actual Rockefeller had ever heard of him. When Boss finally divorced him and won custody, Gerhardt's writer kidnapped their daughter during a supervised visit in 2008, sparking a nationwide manhunt. And then things got worse. Investigators discovered he was also connected to an unsolved 1985 murder in California. He was eventually convicted of both kidnapping and murder. 25. On May 26, 1828, a teenage boy stumbled into the streets of Nuremberg, Germany, barely able to walk, clutching a letter addressed to the captain of the local cavalry regiment. He could hardly speak, seemed terrified of sunlight, and would only say his name, Caspar Hauser. The letter claimed he had been kept in a dark cell for his entire life. Nuremberg's residents took him in, and he quickly became one of the most famous people in Europe. Newspapers called him the Child of Europe. Theories exploded. Was he a hidden prince from the royal house of Baden, kept prisoner to prevent him from claiming the throne? Scholars, doctors, and aristocrats all debated his origins. Then, in 1833, Caspar was found with a fatal stab wound, which he claimed was inflicted by a stranger. He died 3 days later. His tombstone in Ansbach reads, "Here lies Caspar Hauser, riddle of his time. His birth was unknown, his death mysterious." Nearly 200 years later, that riddle remains unsolved. 26. In 1866, a large, heavy-set butcher named Arthur Orton arrived in England from Australia and declared that he was Roger Tichborne, the long-lost heir to one of Britain's wealthiest aristocratic families. The real Roger Tichborne had been a slim, refined, French-speaking gentleman who disappeared at sea in 1854. Orton was none of those things. He weighed roughly 300 pounds, spoke no French whatsoever, and could not remember basic details of the Tichborne family home. Despite all of this, Roger's elderly mother, desperate to believe her son was alive, accepted him immediately. The resulting legal battle became the longest trial in English history at the time, stretching over nearly 300 days. Witnesses came from 4 countries. The entire nation was gripped. In the end, Orton was convicted of perjury and sentenced to 14 years in prison. The case became so famous that it spawned books, plays, and even inspired Jorge Luis Borges to write a short story about it. 27. Count Alessandro de Cagliostro swept through the courts of 18th century Europe, claiming he could turn lead into gold, cure any disease, and brew a serum that granted eternal youth. He founded Masonic lodges, performed dramatic healing ceremonies, and attracted a devoted following of aristocrats and royals who believed every word. His real name was Giuseppe Balsamo, and he was a petty criminal from Sicily who had figured out that wealthy Europeans would pay enormous sums of money to anyone who promised them immortality. His downfall came when he got tangled up in the infamous affair of the diamond necklace, a scandal involving a forged purchase of a spectacularly expensive necklace that was falsely attributed to Queen Marie Antoinette. Cagliostro was imprisoned in the Bastille, and although eventually acquitted of that particular charge, the scandal exposed enough of his lies to ruin him. He was later arrested by the Roman Inquisition for practicing Freemasonry, sentenced to life in prison, and died in a fortress cell in 1795. 28. In the mid-1990s, Stephen Glass was one of the hottest young journalists in Washington. Writing for The New Republic, one of America's most prestigious political magazines, he produced story after story that was vivid, dramatic, and incredibly detailed. There were hackers being hired by the companies they attacked. There were young conservatives partying at political conventions. There were lobby groups and corporate scandals that nobody else had reported on. And none of it was real. Glass fabricated quotes, invented people, and created entire events that never happened. He even built fake websites and set up phony voicemail accounts to cover his tracks when editors tried to fact-check. In 1998, a reporter at Forbes noticed that a company in one of Glass's stories did not seem to exist and started digging. The whole house of cards collapsed. Of the 42 articles Glass published at The New Republic, all but a handful contained fabrications. 29. For decades, Grey Owl was one of the most famous indigenous voices in the world. He lived in the Canadian wilderness, wore buckskin clothing, braided his long dark hair, and wrote best-selling books about the beauty of nature and the need to protect it. He gave packed lecture tours across Canada and Britain, even performing for King George VI at Buckingham Palace. He was credited with almost single-handedly saving the Canadian beaver from extinction through his conservation work. And then he died in 1938, and the truth came out within days. Grey Owl was born Archibald Stansfeld Bellany in Hastings, England. He had moved to Canada at age 17, gradually adopted an Indigenous identity, and spent years perfecting the persona. The revelation caused a massive scandal. But here's the complicated part. His conservation work was genuine and enormously important. He actually did save beavers. He actually did change government policy. So the legacy of Grey Owl remains one of history's most morally tangled cases of identity fraud. 30. In 1920, a woman was pulled from a canal in Berlin after an apparent suicide attempt. She refused to identify herself for weeks, but eventually claimed to be Grand Duchess Anastasia, the youngest daughter of Tsar Nicholas II, miraculously survived from the execution of the Russian royal family in 1918. She became known as Anna Anderson, and for the next 6 decades, she was the most famous Romanov claimant in the world. Some surviving relatives believed her. Others said she was an obvious fraud. Courts in Germany deliberated for years without reaching a definitive conclusion. She married an American history professor, moved to Virginia, and maintained her claim until her death in 1984. The matter was finally settled in the 1990s when DNA testing proved that Anna Anderson was not a Romanov at all. She was Franziska Szankowska, a Polish factory worker who had suffered a mental breakdown. But by then, the myth had already inspired movies, books, plays, and the animated film Anastasia. 31. Frederick Bourdon, a Frenchman nicknamed the Chameleon, has claimed to have assumed over 500 false identities throughout his life. His most infamous con came in 1997, when he convinced a Texas family that he was their missing son, Nicholas Barkley, who had disappeared 3 years earlier at the age of 13. There was just one small problem. Bourdon was 23 years old, had brown eyes instead of blue, spoke with a heavy French accent, and looked absolutely nothing like the missing boy. Yet the family accepted him and brought him into their home. He lived with them for months before an investigator noticed the eye color discrepancy and alerted the FBI. Bourdon later admitted he had impersonated missing children across multiple countries, sometimes from completely different ethnic backgrounds, using nothing more than a sad story and a willingness to exploit desperate parents. His case was explored in the documentary The Impostor, which raises deeply disturbing questions about why that Texas family was so willing to accept an obvious fraud. 32. Aleister Crowley called himself the Beast 666, the wickedest man in the world, and the prophet of a new religion called Thelema. He claimed to have received a holy book from a supernatural entity in Cairo, to have mastered ancient magical arts, and to possess powers beyond ordinary human understanding. He founded a commune in Sicily called the Abbey of Thelema, where rituals allegedly included everything from meditation to animal sacrifice. The tabloid press of early 20th century Britain absolutely despised him, which only increased his fame. But behind the theatrical persona, much of Crowley's magic was elaborate performance designed to attract wealthy followers who would fund his lifestyle. He burned through multiple inheritances, relied on donations from believers, and died nearly broke in a boarding house in Hastings in 1947. His doctor reportedly said that Crowley cursed him on his deathbed, and the doctor died within 24 hours. Whether that was magic or coincidence, it was definitely on brand. 33. After the attacks of September 11, 2001, a woman named Tanya Head emerged as one of the most visible survivors of the World Trade Center tragedy. She claimed she had been on the 78th floor of the South Tower when the plane struck, that she was badly burned, and that a dying man handed her his wedding ring to give to his wife. She became president of the World Trade Center Survivors Network, gave tours of Ground Zero, and was featured in major news stories. For years, she was the public face of survivor resilience. Then in 2007, the New York Times investigated and discovered that Tanya Head's real name was Alicia Esteve Head, And on September 11th, she had not been in New York at all. She was attending business school in Barcelona, Spain. Every detail of her survival story was fabricated. She had never been inside the towers. She did not know the people she claimed to have seen die. Her fraud was not just a lie. It was an act of profound disrespect to every person who actually suffered that day. Fake countries, fake identities, fake rabbit births. 33 people who prove that confidence and a good story can fool literally anyone. Now here is what I actually want to know, and be honest. Which one of these liars do you secretly respect the most? Not admire, respect. The one where you thought, okay, that was kind of brilliant. Drop that name in the comments and I guarantee the answers are going to start a war down there. Smash that like button if this video earned it, and subscribe so you never miss another one.